but I wanted to come on today and give a general overview of what I see going on in sports. I'd like to start out talking about a little high school football, especially here in the Jacksonville area. You had a couple good games last night, a couple local matchups. Bowes and Rains got it on again. They're in the same region, but not the same district. And Bowes pulled out a 14-7 win last night in the Graveyard. In other Jacksonville action, you have Mandarin. It went down to Orlando and avenged an early defeat by Lake Mary, knocking them off 36-10. Bartram Trail went all the way up to the Panhandle for the second week in a row, this time knocking off Niceville 28-21. Riverside, they lost to Orlando Bishop Moore, and they're going to host Bowles next week. Bartram Trail is going to get a rematch with Buchholz. Buchholz and Bartram Trail have an interesting little kind of rivalry building here. They're in the same district, and Buchholz obliterated Bartram Trail 44-7 about 3-4 weeks ago. Last year, Bartram Trail went undefeated, made it to this third round playoff game against Buchholz, and they lost. So they're going to be looking for not only avenging what happened to their undefeated season last year, but trying to show that they belong on the same field with them this year. Now, give you a little backstory on that. For me, I've seen a lot of teams in Jacksonville play this year, and Bartram Trail, I saw them play the preseason game, and they were hitting on all cylinders at that point. And all throughout the season, they were the best team that I saw in the Jacksonville area. Now, Mandarin was ranked #1 in the area for the longest. Then they lost to Lake Mary in the middle of the season. They turned the ball over. And then they also lost in back-to-back weeks with Creekside. Creekside is another building rivalry for Mandarin, and they end up getting knocked off in that rivalry. So they lost 2 in a row. They closed the season by losing to Bartram Trail. Like I said, I thought Bartram Trail was the best team I had seen all year in Jacksonville, despite of what they were saying about Mandarin. I felt like Bartram Trail could beat Mandarin, and they did. But the other team that I hadn't seen up to that point was St. Augustine. St. Augustine is fluent on both sides of the ball. They are a team to be reckoned with. They can run the football. They play good defense. They got a good kicking game. They beat Bartram Trail head-to-head because they're county rivals. And Bartram Trail was just a half a step behind St. Augustine. Now, if they played again, you probably get a different result. But at that time, throughout the regular season, St. Augustine, as far as I'm concerned, they were the best team in the Jacksonville area. But I say all that to say this. Bartram Trail, they had a little slowdown. They lost 4 games during the year, but all the teams that they lost to were undefeated. So all that did was to make them stronger. And when you go to making a schedule where you have a whole bunch of tough opponents, the design is for you to get stronger, and come playoff time, everything comes together. And that seems to be the case in Bartram Trail's favor. Like I said, they went up to Navarre, beat them. They came back again last night and beat Niceville. Now they don't have to worry about taking those long trips anymore. The next trip they're going to take, they're going to Gainesville for the rematch with Buchholz. Now I want to do a breakdown of that game because, like I've seen both of them on multiple occasions, and I think I can give a pretty good breakdown about how I think this game is going to go. But one thing I would like to say, you have a lot of high school teams in Jacksonville that should be playing against each other, but they're going to play in different brackets. They have this split thing here in Florida. They call it Metro and Suburban. So you can be the same size school as one team, but they're classified in Metro while you might be a Suburban team. And what I mean by Metro, the bigger towns. Jacksonville is the biggest city in America land-wise, but they don't have the population that Miami does. So most of the schools in Miami, they're going to be rated in that Metro class. Not necessarily the case with Jacksonville. For instance, you have the 2S ranking. You have Riverside and Bowles. They're not Metro. They're in the Suburban class. So a lot of people are complaining about who got to go in which side of the bracket. Now, I've referenced this a lot of times. When you start comparing, say, Florida, the way they do things in the playoffs, with, say, a Georgia, you have 2 different animals. Take the bigger schools, because all of the lower classes, they do things a little bit different. Like in the real rural areas, even in Georgia. Georgia has 8 regions. You play a region schedule, and the top 4 teams out of that region will make the playoffs. Now, here's the difference with Florida. We used to have districts where everybody in the district would play each other, and the playoff teams are determined about how you finish in the district. Up until, say, like 92, I believe it was, they started allowing runner-up teams in the district to go to the playoffs, because they were finding that you have a lot of teams that were 9-1 and 8-2 that didn't make the playoffs because the team ahead of them knocked them off. I mean, they might have been 10-0. So, of course, those teams are worthy of the playoffs. So they started bringing in the runner-ups. Well, the problem with that is a lot of people started complaining about how they were doing it. When they first came up with this split, they had this thing, a semi-state division. So if you're my runner-up and I beat you, I'm going to be in my bracket. So if I'm in District 4, I'm going to be on that even bracket. But you're going to go to District 3 as in the odd bracket as a runner-up. And if we're going to see each other again, we're both going to play our way back to each other to play for a trip to the state championship game. But they found that in the second and third rounds, you had teams from the same area taking long trips, playing a game against somebody else that might have been 20 or 30 minutes away. So they didn't think that was right. But what the coaches here do, they cry and they cry and they cry till they get a situation where it's favorable to them. So that brings me back to the Reigns and the Bowles situation a few years back. They were in the same district. They were playing game 8 or 9 of the year, knowing that both of them were going to make the playoffs. Well, here's the thing. They would play 2 weeks later again in the second round of the playoffs, because like they had in the semi-state, you would play a runner-up in the first round, but now you playing a semi-region schedule where you're going to take on the same team you just beat 2 weeks ago in your district. Now, I feel like if I'm going to win the district, I shouldn't have to see my runner-up until we at least make it to the semifinals of the state championship. But that's not the way they do it here in Florida. They cater to the coaches that do all the crying. So now what they have is this split between the metro and the suburban. So you have teams that could be playing against each other in, say, the second round of the playoffs. They're on the metro side and you're on the suburban side, and just because of the size of your city or area, that's how you get determined which direction you go. So here we are, Gainesville, Buchholz, again with Barton Trail. Then Mandarin, they got to go back down to Orlando. You have all these teams that could be playing against each other that are similar size, that are all separated based on the metro or suburban district. But like I said, Georgia, when you win your region, you're ranked in your number 1 seed. You do not have to see the team that you beat in your region. They're going in 4 different directions. One's going here, 2 there, 3, north, south, east, and west, 4 different directions. And I don't have to worry about that guy unless we get deep into the playoffs, and I think that's the way it ought to be. But if you really want to see who the best teams are, put them back in the same districts like you used to do, and winner take all. All this little Johnny stuff about you should be awarded for having a winning record and go to the playoffs, well, that's fine if you win your district, but you take Pace. Pace went 8-2. And even with this metro suburban crap, and they got this formula where they determine, well, if you don't win your district, you go into this pool to determine the other 4 teams in your region to make the playoffs. They went 8-2 and didn't make it. And you had some teams 4-6, 5-5 getting to the playoffs. So Pace has a legitimate argument. So what they're proposing now is an all-class playoffs, because you have some teams, they doing some underhanded stuff down here. But I don't want to get into that, so I'm going to slip away from that. But the point is, the playoffs in Florida in full bloom, and you're starting to see the good teams separate from each other, and you're starting to see rematches in these regional finals. Like next week, you're going to have Bartram Trail going back to Buchholz, and you expect to see some good football. Like I said, I have more to say about that later, but today I really want to get into college football. So the second thing I want to talk about is Jimbo Fisher. You know, he's been the hot topic of everybody with his contract situation. I remember when he first got hired at Texas A&M, a friend of mine who's a big Florida State fan told me, man, they just don't know what they're getting. Because if you remember how he closed at Florida State, he had a lot of personal things going on, and his concentration wasn't quite where it should have been, and it caused a problem with what was going on in his program. So had he stayed long enough, he probably was going to get fired from Florida State. So he did the best thing possible. He jumped to Texas A&M, who has deep pockets, and they paid him a contract of $75 million. It's going to make over 10 years. So he was good. Then he started out pretty well, won a bowl game. Then they ripped that contract up and gave him a big raise. I don't remember the exact numbers of that improved contract, but this is the one that they're buying out now. So now, after winning the game against Mississippi State, 51-10, they fired this man because they said that their program is stuck. We're not going forward. We're not really going backwards, but we're not going forward. Well, I can kind of agree with that to a point because I didn't think they should have got rid of Kevin Sumlin. I thought he was doing a pretty good job under the circumstances. It's not like you playing the weak sisters of the poor in your division, that SEC West, so they were always competitive. But now they seem to be competitive, but they just can't get over the hump. So I'm not sure if it was really a good idea to fire him. I think it's some personal things behind the scenes that made Texas A&M want to get rid of Jimbo Fisher, because you're looking at a $77 million to fire a coach, to walk away, and even if he took another job, he still gets to get that money. Why coach? And what's the point? But I felt like that when any coach with a big buyout, why go and get another job if this other school owes you some money? It don't make a whole lot of sense to me. But in Jimbo Fisher, it's the best of both worlds. He can actually go get another job, which he probably can if he wants to go to a lower tier school. He's not going to get another Power 5 or SEC school right now, but he can go somewhere else, get his reputation or mojo back, and come back stronger and get another job, all the while getting this Texas A&M money. They owe him immediately within the next 2 weeks $19 million, and then the rest of the money is going to be done in installments. So when you start talking about college football with this Neil stuff going on, the truth is in the pudding. It's all about money. You think Fisher really cares if he got fired, if he's going to walk away with all that money? You think Caleb Williams is going to cry like he did on TV the other night if he don't win the Heisman Trophy? No, because he's getting long Neil money. So it's all about the money. Now, schools like Mississippi State, who got beat by Jimbo Fisher, they also fired their coach, Zach Arnett. Well, Zach Arnett was put in a bad situation. Mike Leach had that program to the point he was about to turn it all the way around, and then what happens? He dies. Arnett fills in, didn't have time to do any recruiting, didn't have time to do anything else. The team is still pretty much grieving for what happened with Leach, and you got all these different things taking place, and it's just not a favorable position for Zach Arnett to be in. Now, the next coach that they hire, he's going to come in and he's going to be in a whole lot better situation just by the fact that he's coming in fresh. So the talk now, and I don't know why, they talking about Deion Sanders might be a candidate to replace Fisher at Texas A&M. I don't think so. Not because I don't think he can do the job. I am a great fan, and I believe highly that Sanders is going to turn the Buffaloes around, but I just don't see him going to Texas A&M because the leash is going to be a whole lot shorter there than it would be at Colorado. Secondly, I've said all along, I think he's doing this for his sons. He's putting his sons on the stage where they can perform and they can go as high as they can in the sport. Who better to coach him and get him there with somebody with the reputation like Dad, Deion? So he's doing that, and Travis Hunter is doing as well as he is. He has one more year before he's going to go to the pros. So Shedeur and Shiloh and Travis are all going to leave, and I think Deion is going to go right behind him. Now, a lot of people are on this case and turned around because of what's happening lately. Last night they got drugged by Wazoo, but that team is reeling right now, but they also weren't really as good as what the hype was going to be. So the fact that they got the attention on the program was a great job by Sanders himself. But like I said to you before, he's going to go back to the portal. He's not going to have as many holes to fill next year as he did this year, and they're going to be a whole lot better team. Now, keep in mind, I don't know why they fell apart last night. Wazoo is a good team, but not 42 points better than Colorado. So you got some issues going on there. but they've been in a lot of close games. They're going to be going to the Big 12 next year where they don't have to deal with Oregon. They don't have to deal with the Washington States or any other team that might brutalize them. They can go down there and survive and come back strong. So don't kick dirt on the Buffaloes just yet because they're going to come back strong. Now, talking about Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh is in hot water because of that sign stealing situation. They've lost two coaches now. The guy that they caught on the sideline at another school, Stallions, and now the linebacker coach, Partridge, they got rid of him. So who's next? Jim Harbaugh is next. But Harbaugh, I don't think he has any reason to be concerned about that. Why? Because he's a hot ticket. He has won on every level he's coached on. He's turned Michigan around. And for that reason, I don't think Michigan really wants to get rid of him. But if everybody in the conference is down on Michigan for keeping Harbaugh around, they're going to want to, probably for the sake of images, get rid of Harbaugh. I don't think that's a good idea, but I think that's exactly what's going to happen. But who benefits from all this? Ohio State. Why? Because Ohio State can now say, well, Michigan beat us the last 2 years, but why? They probably stole our signals. They knew what we were going to do before we did them, so that's why they did it. That's why they beat us. Well, I got news for you, Ohio State. You guys talked a lot of trash when you had the series going your way, knowing at some point the series was going to turn around. Now, if you get beat next week by Michigan, what are you going to say? You don't have to worry about the sign stealing anymore. Harbaugh, he's not going to even be on the sidelines. So what is going to be your excuse? Now, as far as the punishment for Harbaugh, you tell me, what is the point of putting a guy out for 3 regular season games if he can coach in the postseason? If his crimes were so horrible, then why is he able to coach at all? Why not just fire him and get rid of him? This is just something to appease the people who are complaining about Harbaugh. Probably the people from Ohio State. I know for several years, I'm not sure about now, but Ohio State had the biggest athletic budget in entire college sports. That's probably still the case. So you know they got some influence about what's going on with that Big Ten commissioner. But the problem that Michigan has is that the NCAA is now taking over that investigation, and that's probably going to spell the end of Harbaugh. Well, like I said, Harbaugh, he doesn't have to even worry too much about that, because what's going to happen is he's going to get picked up by an NFL team if he actually wants to do that. So that is particularly up to him. Now, as far as the run goes, I'm calling it early. I think they're going to whip Ohio State again. They're going to get to the playoffs. I'm still not sure if they can beat Georgia or not, but they're going to have an opportunity to prove that. And if this is truly Harbaugh's last year, you know they're going to leave with the guns blazing. Now, I mentioned Georgia. Yeah, I picked Georgia to lose against Ole Miss. Every time I pick against Georgia, they make me look bad. But I only pick really against Georgia because I know the way that fate works. You're not going to win forever, and eventually things are going to turn around on you. Now, there's been a lot of changes in Georgia. If you take Kirby Smart, for instance, watch some of his interviews and listen to how he talks. He didn't talk in an arrogant manner the way he's talking now. He talks almost like it's a foregone conclusion. They're going to whip everybody. Well, eventually that's going to turn around on him. And you still have to give the man his credit. The man is doing a hell of a job up there in Georgia. And right now with Carson Beck, they're starting to look a lot like they looked last year. So Georgia's still going to be a team you got to beat. But looking over his shoulder there, they got Alabama coming up in this SEC championship game. And they got Tennessee today. Tennessee is dangerous only in the fact that you don't know how they're going to play. They have all the potential to beat Georgia at home, but do they have the confidence to beat Georgia at home? I'm starting to think that they don't. I think what has happened, and what normally happens when you come up with an offense that is hard for a lot of people to stop, people study you all year long and they find ways to beat you. You go all the way back to Buddy Ryan and his 46 defense with the Bears. Unstoppable until they finally figured out a way to beat that. And the same thing has happened with Tennessee. So he's going to have to go and get him the right quarterback and get the right receivers to get back on track to where they were before. But as far as beating Georgia, they had the potential. But until somebody whips Georgia, I'm not picking against Georgia again. They just playing good football right now, and they seem to be getting better. So maybe that arrogant, smug face that Kirby Smart is putting on those interviews, maybe it's justified. Maybe he knows something that I don't. But I know one thing: it's going to turn around on them at some point. Now, as far as today's game goes, again, I just picked Georgia over Tennessee. Florida, big game from Florida and Billy Napier. He's been on the hot seat. You know, he got a lot of arrogant fans down here in Florida. They want him out of there because they don't see the progress that he should make. But I would say to them, look to your rival. Mike Norvell struggled at Florida State for several years before now. He's gotten it on track. You're going to have to beat Florida State. And had they got rid of Norvell, they would have had to find another coach and start over again. And the same thing is going to happen if they get rid of Billy Napier. Napier can still save his job, in my opinion, if he finishes strong. He has to compete well against Florida State, and he has to compete well today against Missouri. Both really good football teams. So if you get blown out today and get blown out against Florida State, you can guess by Monday after the Florida State game that Billy Napier would be no more in Gainesville. But I think they're going to put up a good fight today. They always play pretty well against Missouri, but I think that in the end, Missouri is going to win that game just the way LSU pulled away from them last year. They are still fighting, so you have to give them credit for that. But Missouri just is a tad bit better than they are right now, and they need to show up next week for the coach's sake to knock off Florida State. Now, just to recap what I was saying earlier about Georgia and, you know, the arrogance, you know, St. Augustine, they took care of Emmitt Smith School last night, Pensacola, Escambia. That's the second time I've seen Escambia come down here in 4 years. I reported on it before, but the first time Emmitt Smith came to Jacksonville was a playoff game with his high school, the Escambia Gators, and he took on Jacksonville Lee. That name has since been changed to Riverside, but if you know anything about Jacksonville Lee, they produce Edgar Bennett and Leroy Butler. Leroy Butler was in the game as a junior against Smith, the sophomore Smith, in 1984. And if you think about it, and like I said before, this is the first or one of the known cases where you still have two current NFL players in the Hall of Fame that played against each other in high school. And that happened right there in Jacksonville in a place they call the Backyard, Lee High School Stadium right there on McDuff. And again, Escambia came through last night. St. Augustine was just a little bit too tough for them. And you start to see these same matchups that have, you know, that historically occurred. You know, just like any sport, you're going to have the same suspects keep showing up over and over again. Well, I forgot to mention this last week. St. Augustine, we were all in the same district together in high school. They rarely play now, but they did play 2 years ago. They took on Middleburg in the first round. St. Augustine ran off Middleburg, but Middleburg, when we was in school, beat some very good St. Augustine and kept them out of the playoffs. Like I said before, you only had one team out of each district made the playoffs. Then in Middleburg, when they knocked off St. Augustine, that cleared the path for them to make the playoffs. But I'm mentioning Middleburg to say this. I want to give a congratulations out to the Middleburg volleyball team. They finally won the state championship. They made the Final Four 7-8 times before over the last 30 years, and they just couldn't quite get over that hump. But this time they got over the hump and they won their first championship. And also, speaking of Middleburg, 2 years ago, their softball team also won the state championship. So if you're a girl and you're in the Clay County, St. John's, Duval area, and the way players swap schools now to try to get an advantage, Middleburg High School for softball and volleyball might just be a good place for you guys to go and play. So I just want to send a shout out to my old rival, the Broncos. And as I get more updates on what's going on around, and keep you posted as best I can. In the meantime, this has been Coach Hall with Sports for Real. I'm out.